Hello, everyone. Welcome to VRIC Media, your most trusted voice in metals and mining. I'm your host, Darrell Thomas, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Doomberg, one of the top contributors on Substack in finance, geopolitics, as well as macroeconomics. How you doing today, Doomberg?
Darrell, great to be back with you, my friend.
Yes. So I would like to start with gold. Gold has been running significantly over 3,700 an ounce, cooled off a little bit once the Fed um, lowered interest rates. And so just want to get your perspective there on gold.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, obviously, gold is on a historic run, as you mentioned, and it is one of the best performing assets of the year. And we think this is really a reflection of significant geopolitical shifts that are underway, the speed with which those shifts are occurring, and the role that gold will likely play in the next world order, which we think is developing rapidly. Um, Most interesting to us, of course, were the two significant meetings in China recently, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where we had President Putin of Russia, Prime Minister Modi of India, and President Xi Jinping of China all meeting together. We have a lot of focus right now internally on India. Our upcoming Doom Zoom presentation for our pro tier is actually called Losing India. And then the follow-up 80th anniversary of the end of World War II parade in China was really amazing to watch. The presence of Kim Jong-un and Putin and Xi Jinping all in the same box was quite the sight to behold. And then the astonishing array of advanced weaponry that China put on display can only be interpreted as a significant warning shot to the United States that China has at least achieved mutually assured destruction, if not military supremacy over the United States. Probably a controversial thing to say in the United States, but we believe it to be true. And so, in that world, the sort of 50-year run of the post-Nixon gold window US dollar financial system looks to be coming to a close. At a minimum, it looks to be bifurcating between the sort of G7 type countries and the global south. And in a world where China, India, Brazil, Russia, several other large economies, Indonesia, for example, begin to trade and coexist with each other outside of the Western financial system, we think that's probably wildly bullish for gold for reasons we can get into. So, you know, we don't necessarily view gold as a traditional asset class. It is sort of the center of the financial universe. And so when gold is going up, we actually view that as the US dollar going down. And yeah, lots of interesting things to talk about when it comes to gold, but it certainly has been on an impressive run.
Yeah, so I'd like to dive a little further into the obviously the trade and operating outside of the US dollar system has been going on and such. And so, how significant is this for these nations that are able to interact in free trade through a neutral reserve asset like gold?
Yeah, so in that scenario, we should take a step back. Over the 50-year period that I alluded to in my first answer, the manner in which imbalances in international trade were sort of settled, I guess, is through U.S. Treasuries as a neutral reserve asset. And so you would park your excess trade profits in U.S. Treasuries, which would then allow the U.S. to run significant deficits at low interest rates as the global reserve currency holder. That is changing, and it's changing because of actions of the U.S. The first action of the U.S. that has triggered this change is the U.S.'s response to the global financial crisis, which I think shocked the Chinese in particular, but also the weaponization of the U.S. dollar, sanctions, unilateral sanctions on countries like Iran, and of course now Russia, China. Tariffs and sanctions are becoming sort of the same instrument, blunt as they both might be. Sanctions against or tariffs against Brazil and India shouldn't really surprise anybody. Our view is that the U.S. and its allies are in the middle of World War III with the BRICS countries. And that's a war that the U.S. looks set to lose. And so it's a complicated game going on behind the scenes. And history teaches us that you're not going to find out what's going on from the contemporary media, and you probably won't find out what's going on for many years. But that's our view. The weaponization of the U.S. dollar means that U.S. treasuries are no longer neutral. And it's just self-evident. If you seize $200 billion of Russian reserves, now those weren't predominantly treasuries, but European debt instruments sitting in Euroclear, the global South then has to look at those assets as no longer being neutral. If you run afoul of whatever President Trump decides, you can be subject to punishment and have what you think are your assets frozen or taken from you. And that is the primary driver for gold's appreciation in our view, as central banks around the world who may or may not become the subject of U.S. foreign policy objectives begin to scramble away from Western debt and into a more neutral reserve like gold, which of course is nobody's credit. So we view the price of gold in US dollars as a measure of how that war is going. And the higher the price of gold goes, the more likely it is that this new era will be swept in.
Okay, got it. Many of these nations, they don't want us, as in the U.S., in their business, right? I think there were multiple instances that have happened. Obviously, Russia, Ukraine. Russia has their prerogatives or their reasons for why they invaded Ukraine or whatnot. India buying Russian oil, and then Trump comes out and says he's going to impose tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. It's like, what is that? His business. What is that? Our business, as well as the trade and such. And so it seems like these nations are trying to, or well, are actively working to get off from under the big brother watching of the United States.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think India in particular is objecting to Trump's sort of invasion of their sovereignty, is how they would describe it. Also, Trump's taking credit for mediating the most recent skirmish between Pakistan and India did not go over very well in India. These are all things that you won't read, of course, in the Western press. But and so, you know, Putin and Xi Jinping have been working together since really 2014, if not even before that. The whole crisis in Ukraine goes back that far. Putin began this by dumping U.S. treasuries and buying gold. And then China also facilitated this by opening up the Shanghai physical exchange window. And all the pieces were in place for what's transpiring. And they've been slowly and systematically creating payment rails and settlement mechanisms. At the most recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, they also announced what looks to us like the equivalent of a World Bank, a development bank for the Global South, which again takes a significant, powerful tool away from sort of the Atlanticist crowd. And so slowly, systematically, carefully, the BRICS countries, SCO, are aligning in a way that they will develop independent of the old system. And so how the U.S. and its allies responds to that was always the question. And we saw what happened in Ukraine. And we see the saber rattling over Taiwan. But the big challenge for the U.S. and for its allies is the war in Ukraine has exposed the limitations of U.S. military might. It is still undoubtedly an extraordinarily strong force capable of projecting power all over the globe, but whether it can project concentrated power for a long enough time to topple Russia, which it clearly can't, or China, which would be an even bigger challenge. And last thing I would say is that the military combination of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea is quite formidable. Three of those four are nuclear powers, of course. But for all of the descriptions of North Korea as being a hermit kingdom, it is certainly cranking out an enormous amount of weapons, many of which are finding their way to Russia. Russia has learned a lot about advanced NATO weaponry in the war in Ukraine and is undoubtedly sharing those learnings with its military allies. And so there's a real bifurcation of the economy. And in the world, again, where gold is the predominant neutral reserve asset, the price of gold needs to be much higher than it is today for it to effectively serve that purpose. And then last thing I would say is the U.S. itself, of course, could benefit from a rising price of gold. It's effectively a default. And if they revalue their gold holdings, assuming they have them, that can give significant relief as the U.S. manages its amazing debt and the refinancing wall that comes with that debt. And so, there's a lot of momentum behind gold being much higher than where it currently is, although this is not trading advice, and who knows what happens from here.
Mhm. Got it. So recently, I watched a video of it was a official from Russia that was sharing about the U.S. looking to leave other nations holding the bag, and when it comes to the stablecoin act that was just passed and such. And so I want to just kind of get your perspective there, because it seems, I mean, they're obviously watching what we're doing and such, and I mean, it's on a global scale, and it seems like they are also playing chess. Whenever we make a move, they're making a move.
Sure. I mean, I think it was Peskov who may have said that. I remember seeing that in the news cycle too. Um, the U.S. Genius Act and Bessent's message on stablecoins, I think, is very transparent. Stablecoin operators by law now must park their US dollars that people give to the stablecoin operators in exchange for stablecoins. They have to park those in US treasuries, and that creates a permanent bid for short-term US paper, which is helpful when you have a lot of short-term US paper to sell. And there's even a world where one can imagine that stablecoin holders of treasuries will be paid a lower interest rate than market rates. And that's basically a way to exercise yield control. And so in order for that to be effective, you kind of need the market cap of stablecoins to grow. And in order for market cap of stablecoins to grow, it would be nice if there was a bit of a mania in, say, Bitcoin, and pick your favorite cryptocurrencies. And so it's quite clear that the U.S. wouldn't mind if the stablecoin market got to $5, $6, $7 trillion, because that's a steady bid of $5 to $6 or $7 trillion for U.S. paper. And stablecoin holders, of course, who get to clip those coupons with basically no risk. It's not even, they're not investing money; they're holding other people's money. They would probably happily accept a lower interest rate as scale grows, and the U.S. can just decide to do that. It's sort of a clever backdoor way to relieve some of the debt pressure, as opposed to just cutting spending and having some discipline with the government, which we suppose is probably more challenging.
Timing's everything in this business. We've seen commodity prices really move up. The copper price, that started to move up strongly. We're not far off all-time highs, although you wouldn't know it from the junior sector and copper companies in general. But I think over the next year or two, we're going to see that really correct to the upside, and you're going to see a lot of money come into the sectors. Vizsla Copper, we're the team that brought you successes including ISO Energy and Vizsla Silver. If you want to learn more, you can find us at vizslacopper.com.
There was a recent article that came out about the EU planning to sanction Russian natural gas in January of 2027. So, they put the date out there. I guess they were supposed to do it 2028. They put the date, okay, we're cutting it off in 2027. And I guess there were some phone calls between the EU and Trump on making that decision and such, for Trump to put pressure on the Ukrainian situation. At least that's just what I read. And so I just wanted to get your perspective there on this energy situation, because it seems like, I mean, the way the article framed it, was as if the EU is the one that's in control or the one that's in power, you know.
Sure, yeah. I think Trump has done a masterful job of painting Europe into a corner. So the Europeans and Zelensky in Ukraine have been putting significant pressure on Trump to put massive secondary sanctions on Russia and India for buying, sorry, on China and India for buying Russian oil and gas. And that won't work. Trump has to know it won't work. It'll backfire. We've been arguing that sanctions against Russia in particular have backfired from day one. If such sanctions were in place, the price of oil would go much higher. India claims they're only buying Russian oil because the Biden administration asked them to do it in order to make sure that Europe not buying Russian oil didn't cause, a run on Middle Eastern oil and U.S. based oil because those prices would spike astronomically. We've long argued, look, if the U.S. put a naval blockade around Russia and stopped all of Russia's oil exports, it would collapse the global economy. This is just not a sensible strategy. So Trump, who's probably fighting a rearguard action with the neocon wing in Washington, allowed the Europeans to walk out on this branch before he sawed it off by basically saying, I'll put sanctions on. The U.S. will put sanctions on Russia and India after you do. And Europe, of course, dirty little secret, is still buying a huge amount of Russian oil and Russian natural gas through secondary channels. And so Europe is not capable of cutting itself off of Russian energy, direct and indirect. And so the European economy is on the brink already. Trump's tariffs have really hurt, especially German manufacturers. And so Trump's saying, sure, you want me to do all the heavy lifting, destroy our relationship with India, destroy our economics with India. Why don't you go first? So he's asking an impossible thing from Europe, which is a way of quieting European criticism of Trump and the U.S. administration for not imposing, crippling secondary sanctions, which would fail on India and China. And we know they would fail because they've already failed. China called Trump's bluff and just turned off the supply of rare earths, which caused a panic, and the U.S. had to cave. They would do it again. And India said, fine, put the tariffs on. We're going to continue to buy Russian oil. In this presentation we're putting together called Losing India for our pro tier, obviously we always look at things through the lens of energy. What Trump is asking India to do is impossible. And they can't not buy Russian oil, and so they won't. And so I think he kind of tricked the European Union. They're kind of backed into a corner now. And in a clever way, he sort of opened a relief valve, at least politically for him, because who could argue against it? Why should the U.S. be the only one sanctioning Russia and India? Europe buys way more energy from Russia than the U.S. does. The U.S. doesn't need any Russian energy. It has plenty of its own. It's a net energy exporter. And so it was an interesting little rope-a-dope that Trump pulled on the EU.
Yeah. So how does a country like Russia, I mean, obviously, we can't get into the minds of what they're thinking, but, just thinking about someone who is planning to cut you off, or stop buying your product or whatever, almost as like a strategic move or as a punitive measure because of your policies and your practices and such. And so it kind of just makes it seem like they're in the driver's seat. And so I'm kind of wondering, is there a risk that Russia just cuts them off cold turkey? Just like, hey, like you're planning to do this to me. Like I'll just cut you off yourself. I'll cut the cord for you. So I'm kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, Russia's not going to do that with its partners. It has a very close relationship with India, a long and historical one. This might surprise you, but Russia is the largest weapons supplier to India.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the EU.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the EU it's got no cards. I mean, let's be honest. And in fact, Russia won't cut anybody off of energy. So Putin's strategy is to just systematically let his enemies, dig their own holes. And look, we saw this whole fake GPS jamming Ursula von der Leyen's plane. Russia jammed her GPS, which of course was totally made up story. We thought about writing a piece where we were going to argue that the The last thing Putin would want would be for Ursula von der Leyen to not be European Commission president, because she's doing a great job of ruining Europe as it is. When your enemy is digging their own hole, you just let them keep digging. And so Europe will cut itself off of energy over time. It has done so already. It's deindustrializing. Russia need not be provocative. It just needs, it is genuinely concerned, I think, with the views of the global South, and they want to be seen as a reliable trading partner to China, to India, to Brazil, to Indonesia, Vietnam, other countries. And so they'll just sit back and let Europe spin its wheels. It really is amazing the lack of competence in European circles, political circles these days. It's just incredible. And so I don't think Putin needs to do anything. When you're winning, you just sit back and keep winning.
Yeah, yeah, got it. So earlier you mentioned China and the Xi Jinping calling Trump's bluff with the rare earth situation. So if China were to cut us off from rare earths, like how bad would that be? Like for people that,
Sure, we'd have to shut down most of the auto manufacturing in the country, for starters. That was the big scare that got Trump and Bessent to reach out to China and try to cut a deal. So at the same time that Trump is talking about tariffs on China, Bessent is negotiating a trade deal with China. And do we really, does the U.S. really want to blow all that up over a tactic that the Europeans are calling for that has a proven history of not working? So what Trump says and what Trump is saying behind the scenes are often wildly different things, especially if you just looked at Trump's Truth Social posts, you would have a very different view of what he actually thinks. He's obviously very loose on Truth Social, but at the same time, pretty strategic. And so, we've long argued that sanctions wouldn't work, that the sanctions war against Russia has lost. Russia's a self-sufficient economy. It has practically no debt. It has tons of gold. It's an energy superpower. It's a military superpower. It's far out producing NATO weapons. The economic and military attempt to topple Russia has failed. And losing wars is hard. So Trump's strategy is the correct one, which is to reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing and military supply chains because China dominates them. Huge strategic blunder over the past 20 years or so. But you have to fix that first before you can project power, right? And so there's a timing issue. It takes time to reinvigorate a manufacturing supply chain, a military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex outsourced far too much of its critical supply chains to China in the name of efficiency and quarterly profits and executive bonuses and all of that stuff. That's not how China, and that's not how Russia, and certainly not how North Korea operate their military supply chains. The free market in the U.S., as it is currently operated, does a poor job of pricing in national security risk and environmental degradation, period. And China took advantage of both of those. And Trump has realized the problem. Trump understands what the long-term solution is, but that means in the short term, he does not have escalation dominance. And one of the flaws of Trump as a negotiator is he always assumes he has negotiation dominance in any negotiation, which is sometimes true and sometimes not. And when it's not, bluffs are called, and then he has to find creative ways to walk things back.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that multiple times. So just thinking about the military industrial complex and how these resources, rare earths, play into that on weapons and things of that nature. You mentioned earlier the China's display of their military capabilities and powers and strength and such. And so, I'm just kind of curious there. I've seen multiple of these defense-related stocks outperform and do really well over the last few years, and it seems like defense is a sector that is going to continuously be lucrative, considering, I mean, even looking at our deficits and how much we're spending on defense, and then looking at the weapons, the issue with weapons, even to Ukraine. I've heard that we've depleted a lot of our stockpiles of weapons and such, sending weapons off to these other proxy wars and such. And so I just want to get your outlook there.
Look, front page of the Wall Street Journal just this morning as we're we're hitting record. Trump's team explores government-backed manufacturing boost. Discussions center on how to use money from a $550 billion fund to spur construction of factories and other infrastructure. As I said in my last response, there's going to be a huge manufacturing boom in the U.S. Trump is correct to identify that as a national security issue. There will be copious amounts of money spent on it and lots of money to be made for savvy investors who can predict where the puck is going. I think we saw that MP deal, really shock investors, just the structure of it. We praised it, of course, in a piece called How It's Done. And so there's going to be many, many such deals. If the U.S. is going to be putting $550 billion to work, injecting that into the cap tables of various manufacturers in a way that helps the manufacturers de-risk construction, but also gives U.S. taxpayers participation in any upside of the stock. That's the kind of win-win that Trump is correctly trying to generate. And so we have wholeheartedly agree with that strategy, and we think there's going to be an enormous amount of interesting opportunities for investors as a consequence.
Yeah, I've been having trouble with, which one to pick, right? It seems like there's news articles that comes out on one company versus another and such. Like who would have known like MP Materials, who would have known Centrus Energy, some of these other companies that are landing these government contracts and such. And so it seems like kind of a tricky game, especially considering that certain companies are landing some of these deals and some of them aren't. And so then the question would remain, does all boats rise, with this massive amounts of money that's going to be printed and spent on military and defense?
Certainly many nominal boats will rise. Remains to be seen whether any inflation that comes from all of this will offset those gains, at least in real terms. But stocks are at an all-time high, gold's at an all-time high, Bitcoin near an all-time high. We're seeing the signs of sort of very much risk on. I see SPACs are making a comeback. I see Chamath is out there. I saw a SPAC go through, I think, a SPAC to make a crypto holding company. If that doesn't tell you where we are in the cycle, I don't know what will. And so, in such times, I think you need to be exposed to risk assets. I mean, they're going up. So we'll see. This is just beginning. I think, if anything, India, China, and Russia calling Trump's bluff is only going to cause Team Trump to accelerate, double and triple down on that initiative because it has to happen. So we'll see, but it's certainly, the spigots are open and off to the races we go.
Got it. Well, yeah, appreciate that perspective. So could you share with me what is one of the biggest things that you are looking at, concerned about, or whatnot within the global macro or domestic macro sector?
Yeah, we're watching the situation in Venezuela quite carefully. Obviously, that's very significant. There's no question now, I think, that at least part of the Trump administration, the sort of the neocon wing led by the Secretary of State, would like to see a regime change in Venezuela. There are other parts of the Trump administration that think they can cut a deal with Maduro, but Marco Rubio in particular, of course, has been, at least if you read and you believe what's being reported in the Wall Street Journal and so on, he's been leading the push to overthrow Maduro. The presence of the U.S. military at scale off of Venezuela's shores should be a bit of an eye-opener for Maduro, I'm sure. So that's the one situation that could materially change things. For those that don't know, Venezuela has the largest hydrocarbon deposits in the world, on par or bigger than Saudi Arabia, chronically mismanaged, with the whole Guyana boom right next door, Chevron with a long history inside Venezuela. We would keep a very close eye on what's going on in Venezuela.
Okay, got it. Well, yeah, appreciate you sharing that. Well, where can the audience find more information tap into your writings and everything. Obviously, you're on Substack, and so
Sure.
connect with you.
Yeah, Doomberg.com for all things Doomberg. And also, we've started a sister publication in a completely different area, but one that's pretty fun. It's called Classics Read Aloud. If you just type in classicsreadaloud.substack.com, you'll find our sister publication, as the name implies. It's founded by one of the Doomberg co-founders and its editor-in-chief. Just launched it September 1st. That's been a lot of fun. So if you're looking for something different, if you're interested in classic literature, extremely well produced, you can find that there. Darrell, always great to talk to you, and looking forward to our next discussion.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm looking forward to checking out the classics read aloud as well, because it's just good to have something positive and
Yeah.
and everything.
Yeah, we just launched it with a piece called "Get To." If your listeners want to read that, it's we have a lot of depth and breadth on the Doomberg team, and it's not just energy and geopolitics and finance, but also a keen interest in the classics and classically educating our children, and taking the time to experience the classics in the way in which those authors meant them to be experienced. And so these will be read by Doomberg's editor. She's brilliant at it, and it's very well produced. We wouldn't do anything as a Doomberg team that isn't to the highest level of professionalism possible, and Classics Read Aloud will be no different. That project's off to a great start, and many people have responded positively to it. Like I say, it's nice to revisit these amazing, really works of art in the written form. But as the tagline to Classics Read Aloud says, you're never too young or too old to be read to.
All right, you all be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for joining VRIC today, and you all have a good day.